In the annals of Islamic history, few events carry the weight of profound lessons and stark reminders as the Battle of Uhud. It stands as a pivotal moment, not of triumphant victory, but of near victory turned into a costly lesson, a testament to the consequences of disobedience and the unwavering faith of the early Muslim community. In the face of immense adversity, to understand this battle, we must return to the sands of Arabia, a year after the stunning Muslim victory at the Battle of Badr. The defeat at Badr was a humiliation the proud Quraysh of Mecca could not bear. Their leaders had fallen, their trade route was threatened, and their prestige throughout Arabia was shattered. The desire for revenge burned fiercely in their hearts, a fire stoked by the grief of families who had lost their fathers, sons, and brothers. Abu Sufyan ibn Harb, who had now risen to preeminence in Mecca, vowed to avenge the losses. He, along with other Meccan leaders like his wife Hind bint Utbah, who had lost her father, uncle, and brother at Badr, began to rally the tribes. They poured their wealth into assembling a formidable army, determined to crush the nascent Muslim state in Medina once and for all. This was not merely a raid, it was a meticulously planned campaign of annihilation. Their army, numbering around 3,000 well-equipped soldiers, including a strong cavalry contingent, marched towards Medina with a singular purpose: to extinguish the light of Islam and kill the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. When news of the approaching Meccan army reached Medina, the Prophet Muhammad convened a council of war to decide on a course of action. The older, more experienced companions, including the Prophet himself, favored a defensive strategy. They suggested fortifying Medina and fighting the invaders from within the city's narrow streets and alleys, where the Meccan cavalry would be neutralized and the defenders would have the advantage. However, many of the younger, more zealous Muslims, particularly those who had missed the glory of Badr, were eager to meet the enemy. In open combat, they argued that staying within the city walls would be perceived as cowardice and would embolden their enemies. Their passion was palpable and their voices strong. Bowing to the overwhelming sentiment of his companions, the Prophet Muhammad decided to march out and face the Quraysh on the battlefield. The Muslim army, numbering only about 700 men after a contingent of 300 hypocrites led by Abdullah ibn Ubay deserted them, was vastly outnumbered and less equipped, yet their hearts were filled with faith as they marched towards the plains beneath the rocky slopes of Mount Uhud. The Prophet Muhammad, a master strategist, surveyed the battlefield and identified a critical strategic point. On a small hill, later known as Jabal al-Rumah, the Hill of the Archers, he stationed a group of 50 archers under the command of Abdullah ibn Jubair. His instructions to them were explicit, absolute, and of paramount importance. Stay at your posts, do not leave your position under any circumstances. If you see us winning, do not come down to join us. And if you see us losing, do not come down to help us. Protect our rear from the enemy cavalry. Repel them with your arrows. These 50 men were the linchpin of the entire Muslim battle plan, a human wall tasked with preventing the Quraysh cavalry, led by the brilliant but at that time polytheist tactician Khalid ibn al-Walid, from outflanking the Muslim army. As the battle commenced, the initial clashes favored the Muslims. Despite being outnumbered, their courage and disciplined fighting, fueled by their devotion, were overwhelming. The flag bearers of the Quraysh fell one after another, and their lines began to crumble. The Meccan army, which had marched with such arrogance, started to waver and then break into a full-scale retreat. The Muslim soldiers surged forward, driving their enemies back and seizing the spoils of war that lay scattered across the abandoned Meccan camp. Victory seemed not just possible but imminent and complete. The Muslims had for a moment won the day. It was at this precise moment of apparent triumph that the seeds of disaster were sown. From their vantage point on the hill, the archers saw their fellow Muslims collecting the spoils of war, the mal-e-ganimat. Believing the battle was over and victory secured, a majority of them, around 40 in number, began to feel the pull of material gain. Despite the desperate pleas of their commander, Abdullah ibn Jubair, who reminded them of the Prophet's strict orders, the desire to collect their share of the booty was too strong. They argued that their task was done, the enemy was defeated, and there was no longer any threat. They abandoned their crucial post and rushed down the hill to join the others in gathering the spoils. This single act of disobedience created a fatal gap in the Muslim defenses. Khalid ibn al-Walid, with the sharp eyes of a military genius, saw the opportunity he had been waiting for. He wheeled his cavalry squadron around Mount Uhud, galloped through the now unguarded pass, and crashed into the rear of the Muslim army. The surprise was total and the effect was devastating. The Muslim ranks, previously organized and advancing, were thrown into chaos and confusion. their victory turned into a desperate struggle for survival as they found themselves caught in a pincer movement, attacked from both the front and the rear. In the ensuing chaos, a false rumor spread like wildfire through the battlefield: the Prophet has been killed. This news shattered the morale of many Muslim fighters. Some threw down their weapons in despair, believing their cause was lost. The battle devolved into a maelstrom of individual fights. The Prophet Muhammad himself was gravely injured, struck by stones that broke his teeth and wounded his face, and a blow to his helmet caused two of its rings to embed in his cheek. He was surrounded by a small heroic band of companions, including Talha ibn Ubaydullah and Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, who formed a human shield around him, fighting with ferocious loyalty to protect him. It was a dark and bloody hour. Brave companions like the Prophet's uncle, Hamza ibn Abd al-Muttalib, the Lion of God, were martyred, his death a particularly brutal one that caused the Prophet immense grief. Slowly, amidst the pandemonium, the remaining Muslims recognized the Prophet was alive. Rallying around him, they managed to fight their way up the slopes of Mount Uhud, finding refuge on higher ground where the Meccan cavalry could not reach them. The Quraysh, though they had inflicted heavy losses, were too exhausted to press their advantage and lay siege to the mountain. Abu Sufyan approached the base of the mountain and taunted the Muslims, declaring victory for his idols. However, he ultimately decided to lead his army back to Mecca, content with the revenge he had exacted, but failing in his ultimate objective of destroying the Muslim community. The Battle of Uhud was over. The Muslims had lost 70 of their finest men, while the Meccan losses were far fewer. It was not a decisive military defeat in the sense that the Muslim state survived, but it was a profound spiritual and psychological blow. The day that began with the promise of a resounding victory ended in sorrow, pain, and retreat. The lesson was seared into the consciousness of the Muslim Ummah forever: the importance of obedience to leadership, the dangers of worldly desire, and the reality that victory and defeat are ultimately in the hands of God, but human choices have immediate and severe consequences.